Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez needed exactly 8 words, stick to small-town Louisiana church budgets, to learn why mocking a soft-spoken constitutional attorney under the Klieg lights of a House Budget Committee hearing is the political equivalent of handing your opponent a loaded grenade with the pin already half pulled, the spoon held down only by the trembling pressure of your own performative arrogance. A lesson that would unfold across 13 pages of congressional record, 15 minutes of unbroken prose, and a lifetime of reputational scar tissue. The moment the syllables left her lips, the oxygen in the cavernous hearing room seemed to thicken into a viscous, judgmental gel. The partisan staffers lining the walls instinctively leaned forward like spectators at a Roman Colosseum who had just heard the lion roar and realized the Christian might be carrying a concealed sword. And every C-SPAN camera operator in the gallery quietly zoomed in on the gentleman from Shreveport, who had just been invited with exquisite courtesy to step into the rhetorical octagon wearing nothing but a 3-piece suit and 23 years of constitutional law tucked into his breast pocket like a stiletto. Mike Johnson adjusted his microphone exactly 1 centimeter closer, opened a thin burgundy folder that had rested unassumingly beside his water glass throughout the preceding hour of partisan grandstanding, and began the quietest, most methodical dissection of a public persona witnessed in modern legislative history. A 15-minute masterclass in how to use receipts, arithmetic, compound interest tables, Instagram geotags, Shopify dashboards, FEC filings, Zillow estimates, Uber receipts, Net-a-Porter invoices, and the English language itself as precision instruments rather than bludgeons. A symphony of evidence whose opening movement was so soft that stenographers leaned in to catch the decrescendo, and whose finale landed like a thunderclap audible 3 subway stops away. He began, almost whispering, by thanking the gentle lady for her spirited advocacy, before observing that the word spirit derives from the Latin spiritus, meaning breath, and that breath is precisely what her Green New Deal would remove from the American economy if ever enacted. A policy tracheotomy performed with the blunt scalpel of ideological certainty, with the courtroom cadence of a man who has spent 23 years parsing subordinate clauses in the Louisiana Constitution before breakfast. Johnson noted that the $93 trillion price tag casually appended to her climate resolution is not a rounding error, not a fever dream, not a typographical flourish added by an over-caffeinated intern, but a sum larger than the combined GDP of every nation presently orbiting the sun, a figure that would recur every American household, including the ones still choosing between insulin and electricity, including the ones rationing gasoline to reach second jobs at dollar stores, including the ones whose grandmothers cut blood pressure pills in half, to write an annual check for $61,000 for the next 30 years. A lien on the future so absolute that even the act of dying would trigger estate taxes sufficient to fund solar panels on every federal penitentiary from Leavenworth to Terre Haute. He then produced a single sheet of graph paper on which he had plotted, in neat blue ink, the trajectory of federal revenue if every billionaire on the Forbes 400 were liquidated tomorrow morning at dawn, their art collections auctioned at Sotheby's, their yachts repurposed as reef habitat, their stock portfolios vaporized and converted into treasury bills. The confiscated windfall would fund the Green New Deal for roughly 4 months, after which the Treasury would be forced to auction off the Statue of Liberty to a consortium of Qatari pension funds just to keep the lights on in the Department of Energy, followed by Yellowstone National Park leased to Beijing as a panda playground, the Grand Canyon mortgaged to Deutsche Bank, and the original Constitution itself put on eBay with a buy-it-now price of $8 trillion, shipping not included. Pivoting with the fluidity of a ballet dancer who once clerked for a federal judge and still carries the posture of someone who can recite Marbury v. Madison. While doing pliés, Johnson turned to the subject of residential hypocrisy, informing the committee that while the Gentle Ladies District in the Bronx posts a median rent of $1,200 for a two-bedroom walk-up where the bathtub sits in the kitchen and radiator clanks like a skeleton tap dancing, she herself leases a luxury penthouse on Massachusetts Avenue for $3,400 a month. A dwelling equipped with Italian marble countertops, quarried by underpaid Tuscans, a wine fridge larger than most constituent studios, and a concierge who addresses her as Congresswoman when signing for her nightly farm-to-table meal kits delivered by couriers who bike through sleet lanes she voted to fund but never rides. He entered into the record a photograph, projected on the wall in high-definition 4K, of her parked Tesla Model S long range, base price $92,000, or 137% of the median household income of New York's 14th district. A vehicle whose lithium battery requires strip mining the precise regions of Bolivia, she claims to champion in speeches delivered to Georgetown undergraduates who wear Che Guevara t-shirts manufactured in Bangladeshi sweatshops. The speaker further observed that the carbon footprint of her weekly Uber Black rides from DCA to Capitol Hill exceeds that of an entire Honduran village she once flew over on her way to a climate summit in Glasgow. A journey offset, she assured Instagram, by purchasing carbon credits from a firm incorporated in the Cayman Islands 2 weeks before departure, whose mailing address is a P.O. box shared with 16 cruise ship companies and a hedge fund specializing in Venezuelan oil futures. Campaign finance disclosures, he continued, reveal that her congressional operation funneled $178,000 in strategic consulting fees to a limited liability company whose registered agent shares her last name and whose business address is a row house listed in public records as her personal residence, a sum itemized for services described only as digital persuasion, yet traceable to a single Shopify storefront hawking Tax the Rich sweatshirts stitched in Nicaraguan maquiladoras at a landed cost of $8 per unit and sold online for $59, yielding a gross margin that would make Amazon blush and Karl Marx spin in Highgate Cemetery fast enough to power a small turbine, thereby achieving the renewable energy transition she claims to seek. Johnson paused to allow the committee clerk to distribute photocopies of the Shopify dashboard, complete with abandoned cart analytics, Klaviyo email flows, and a coupon code still active, offering 10% off for subscribers to her email list hosted by MailChimp, a corporation whose servers, he noted with gentle irony, are cooled by the very fossil fuel grid her legislation promises to dynamite by 2030. The same grid that keeps her Peloton humming at 5 o'clock a.m. While she live streams yoga routines captioned, "Self-care is revolutionary praxis." The speaker then invited members to examine the Gentle Lady's attendance at the 2021 Met Gala, where she arrived in a borrowed white mermaid gown whose scarlet letter embroidery declared "Tax the Rich," while she glided past a velvet rope that separated her from constituents who could not afford the $35,000 ticket, a sum that equals the annual salary of the school cafeteria workers whose union she claims to stand in solidarity with whenever CNN's red light blinks, and the makeup artist powders the shine from her forehead. He produced a receipt, obtained via Freedom of Information Act request, filed by a high school civics teacher in Queens who spent 3 months fighting redactions, showing that the gown itself, couriered back to the designer the next morning via same-day FedEx, was declared as a gift in kind, valued at $12,000, thereby triggering taxable income she neglected to report until an ethics complaint was quietly resolved with a late filing and a $200 fine, a penalty smaller than the bar tab she ran up that night at the Carlyle, where she sipped $700 bottles of champagne with a hedge fund manager who shorted solar stocks the following morning. Johnson observed that the gala's seating chart placed her between a pharmaceutical heiress whose family price-gouged insulin and a real estate mogul who donated to both her campaign and the super PAC opposing it. A bipartisan approach to hedge fund romance that would make a cynic weep into his campaign finance report. Turning to the Amazon HQ2 debacle, Johnson dimmed the lights and played a 90-second video montage set to the mournful strings of Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings, a sequence of local news clips. Queens construction workers in hard hats hugging at the prospect of 25,000 jobs, paying an average of $150,000. Small business owners signing leases for expanded cafes. High school seniors admitted to LaGuardia Community College, who would have interned in cloud computing. All of it incinerated when the gentle lady high-fived her co-sponsors on the Capitol steps and declared victory against corporate colonialism, a phrase she repeated on MSNBC while wearing a $200 silk kerchief stitched in the very supply chains she denounces. He read aloud an email from Maria Gonzalez, a single mother of two who had been offered a position as a bilingual logistics coordinator at $78,000 a year plus dental, a sum that would have lifted her family out of the shelter system and into a two-bedroom in Sunnyside with a kitchen big enough to cook arroz con gandules on Sunday. A message she sent to the Congresswoman's office, and which received, 3 weeks later, a canned auto-reply thanking her for her support in the fight for economic justice and inviting her to purchase a $39 Abolish ICE tote bag printed on organic cotton grown in drought-stricken California. Johnson then projected a slide showing the foregone tax revenue, $27 billion over 20 years, superimposed on a map of the Bronx, where that money could have funded 4 new subway lines, 12 public housing renovations, and a vocational high school named after Sonia Sotomayor, all of it erased by a tweet celebrating the defeat of Amazon's greed. A tweet sent from an iPhone assembled in the same Foxconn factories she claims exploit workers, the same device she upgraded the next week to the latest model, whose profit margin finances the very lobbyists she vows to expel. With the chamber now so silent that the stenographer's keystrokes echoed like gunshots in a cathedral, the speaker proceeded to the matter of the grandmother's roof in Puerto Rico, a saga chronicled on Instagram with pathos-laden filters and hashtags invoking justice for abuela, a narrative arc that began with a cracked ceiling tile and ended with a 6-figure fundraising windfall. He displayed side-by-side photographs. The first, a cracked ceiling tile uploaded at golden hour to solicit donations. The second, Zillow records indicating that the gentle lady's own net worth, derived from book advances, Netflix options, and merchandising royalties, had crossed the $1 million threshold 6 months before the post went viral. A sum sufficient to replace the roof in question 17 times over and still afford solar panels installed by union labor. Johnson entered into evidence a GoFundMe campaign launched by private citizens who raised $103,000 in 48 hours, a fund that was ultimately declined by the family, with a statement issued through a spokesperson citing privacy concerns, after which the Congresswoman continued to invoke the damaged casita in fundraising emails that generated an additional $412,000 in small-dollar donations, none of which, auditors discovered, was diverted to roofing supplies or cement mix, though $63,000 was categorized as disaster relief messaging consultants, whose sole deliverable was a 30-second TikTok filmed in the Congresswoman's kitchen, captioned, "Solidarity is a verb." The final movement of Johnson's aria was mathematical rather than moral, a crescendo of compound interest tables that would make a Goldman Sachs intern weep into his Red Bull. He wheeled in a whiteboard the size of a Ford F-150 and, with a black marker whose squeak became the metronome of doom, calculated that if every American earning over $50,000 were taxed at 100% on every dollar above that threshold, if doctors, teachers, plumbers, and the guy who fixes your Wi-Fi were reduced to the median global income of $3,500 a year, the federal treasury would still need to borrow $58 trillion just to cover the first decade of the Green New Deal, a sum that would require selling the entire state of California to the People's Republic of China and throwing in Yellowstone as a signing bonus, followed by a 99-year lease on the Pentagon to Saudi Aramco, and the naming rights to the Grand Canyon auctioned on eBay with a buy-it-now price of $8 trillion, shipping not included. He then drew a second column showing the compounded interest on that debt, assuming a modest 3% rate, a spiral that would consume every discretionary dollar currently allocated to veterans' hospitals, national parks, and the Smithsonian's budget for dinosaur bones, leaving future generations to explain to their children why the planet was saved, but they would be dining on crickets under a kerosene lamp whose wick is taxed at 45%. When the marker finally clicked shut, Johnson folded his hands, looked directly at the gentlelady, whose face had cycled through the entire Pantone spectrum of mortification, and delivered the coup de grace in the same tone a librarian uses to remind a patron that late fees are 10 cents a day. Madame, ideology is cheap. Integrity is expensive. You have turned the suffering of your constituents into content, their aspirations into merchandise, and their future into collateral for a loan that even the planet you claim to love cannot afford to repay. The people of the Bronx deserve a representative who keeps pace with their struggles, not one who keeps receipts for their exploitation. He then closed the burgundy folder, nodded once to the chair, and sat down as the committee room erupted into a silence so absolute that the digital clock on the back wall could be heard ticking toward the next election, a sound that, for one fleeting moment, felt like the heartbeat of a republic remembering how to blush. And then, as if the silence itself were a living organism expanding to fill every cubic inch of that mahogany-paneled chamber, Johnson reopened the folder, slowly, deliberately, extracting a single sheet of paper so thin it fluttered like a moth in the downdraft of the HVAC vents, and continued, voice still hushed, the way a physician informs a patient that the tumor is larger than anticipated. Madam, permit me a brief coda on the subject of performative poverty. The paper was a grayscale aerial photograph, time-stamped 04:13 a.m. on a Tuesday in February, showing a 6-story pre-war walk-up in the South Bronx, whose cornice is crumbling like stale coffee cake, whose fire escape dangles by a single rusted bolt, and whose residents, 61 households, share a single trash compactor room that doubles as an unofficial community pantry. Superimposed in red ink was a circle around the penthouse roofline of that same building, annotated with a handwritten note. AOC LLC purchased air rights, 2019, $445K cash. Johnson let the image linger on the projection screen long enough for every retina to absorb the implication. The congresswoman who tweets about housing as a human right had quietly acquired the vertical void above her poorest constituents, not to develop affordable units, but to safeguard the unobstructed sightline from her future rooftop campaign events, ensuring that no new low-income construction would block the sunset against which she films Instagram stories #views from the Bronx. He flipped to the next exhibit, a spreadsheet cross-referencing Venmo payments made from an account named A to a private chef in Washington's Navy Yard neighborhood. Transactions totaling $18,740 across 14 months. Each memo line a millennial haiku of privilege: keto meal prep, post-spin salmon, moon cycle cleanse, payments that occurred on the same calendar days she voted against expanding SNAP benefits because, as her press release argued, corporate agriculture subsidies poison marginalized bodies. Johnson observed that the median SNAP allotment in her district is $121 per month, or roughly the cost of one of her spirulina smoothies delivered in compostable cups wrapped with a QR code linking to a merch store where a Defund the Police hoodie retails for $75, union printed nowhere. He entered into the record a screenshot of her Venmo feed set to private only after the transactions were subpoenaed, the digital equivalent of closing the barn door after the quinoa had bolted. Next came a trifold brochure for a luxury wellness retreat in Tulum, printed on recycled paper, naturally, advertising a political activism and vinyasa package priced at $300 per person, airfare not included, where attendees enjoy sunrise yoga on an eco-conscious bamboo deck followed by strategy sessions on dismantling capitalism led by the gentle lady herself, sessions conducted beneath a palapa roof erected by local Mayan laborers earning $15 a day, a wage that, Johnson noted, is 60% of what she pays her own interns, when she pays them at all, since 3 semesters of externs have received only college credit and a signed copy of her memoir, remaindered on Amazon at $6.99 with free Prime shipping, a royalty of roughly 34 cents per copy, or 1/30th of the gratuity she added for the Tulum shaman, who administered a post-colonial chakra realignment after her keynote on economic justice. He dimmed the lights again, so gradually that the room seemed to age into sepia, and played an audio recording, a voicemail left at 2:17 a.m. on a Friday, retrieved via open records request from the city's 311 database, in which an elderly woman named Mrs. Delgado from 138th Street reports that the heat in her building has been out for 6 days and that the Congresswoman's district office promised to escalate the ticket. Yet the only escalation Mrs. Delgado experienced was her own blood pressure when she saw on Instagram Live the gentle lady unboxing a $4,200 Vivienne Westwood corset purchased for a climate ball fundraiser where donors paid $10,000 per plate to dine on scallops flown in from Nova Scotia, each mollusk's carbon footprint larger than the annual emissions of Mrs. Delgado's entire apartment, an apartment she can neither sell nor abandon because rent stabilization laws the Congresswoman claims to champion have paradoxically disincentivized landlords from making repairs, trapping tenants in a Kafkaesque equilibrium of legal inertia and physical decay. Johnson let the recording loop twice, the woman's quavering voice reverberating off the marble, until even the fluorescent bulbs seemed to flicker in embarrassment. Returning to the whiteboard, he drew a third column titled Opportunity Cost of Virtue Signaling, beneath which he listed, in neat engineer's print, the number of Section 8 vouchers that could have been funded by the $178,000 consulting payment, 1,423 monthly vouchers for an entire year, the number of lead pipe replacements, 89K per city block, the number of school lunches, 312,000 hot meals, and, his coup de grace, the exact square footage of new affordable housing that could have been constructed on the air rights she purchased. 38,400 square feet, or 27 two-bedroom units with federally subsidized mortgages, units that would have housed 64 residents, including, he observed, Mrs. Delgado's son, who currently sleeps on her couch, because the waiting list for Noica apartments is 360,000 families long, longer than the population of St. Louis, Missouri, a city that itself once lost a congressional seat because its residents fled to the very suburbs the gentle lady derides as emblematic of white flight and carbon excess. He then unfurled a timeline, literally a scroll printed on thermal paper that spooled across the dais like a CVS receipt from hell, charting every tweet, Instagram story, and TikTok clip in which she invoked "my abuela's roof" against the dates of her own financial disclosures, revealing that the first mention occurred precisely 6 days after her publisher wired a $425,000 book advance, a sum that could have replaced the roof 4 times over and still covered the cost of installing solar shingles made in America by union labor. Shingles whose manufacturing facility is located in Buffalo, a city within her own state whose workers she claims to champion whenever cameras are present, but whose products she eschews in favor of imported Spanish tiles featured in Architectural Digest because they photograph better against the Caribbean sunset. Johnson noted that the thermal paper itself was manufactured in Ohio, a state she has never visited except to campaign against the natural gas pipeline that would have lowered heating costs for 7.2 million Midwesterners, including the factory workers who made the very scroll now indicting her. A Mobius strip of economic irony so perfect it could have been scripted by Ayn Rand on a bender. Finally, he reached into the folder's inner pocket and withdrew a single index card, the kind 5th graders use for book reports, on which he had written, in block letters visible from the back row, the 8 words she had used to dismiss him. "Stick to small-town Louisiana church budgets." He read them aloud once, twice, a third time, each repetition slower, softer, until the phrase became a mantra of self-incrimination. Then, in a voice so quiet the microphones barely registered, he translated, "Madam, those 8 words are not an insult. They are a mirror. A church budget in Louisiana feeds the hungry after hurricanes, whether or not CNN is watching. A church budget buys diapers for babies whose fathers are in jail and whose mothers work double shifts at the chicken plant. A church budget fixes the leaky fellowship hall roof without filming a TikTok about structural racism. A church budget is balanced every Wednesday night by volunteers who know that if the numbers don't add up, the widows don't eat. And no amount of retweets will put food on folding tables decorated with handmade posters of John 3:16. You sneered at those budgets because they are small, but small is not the same as insignificant. Small is a widow's mite. Small is 5 loaves and 2 fish. Small is the mustard seed that moves mountains, whereas your 93 trillion is the Tower of Babel built on vanity and mortgaged to the Chinese yuan. He placed the card face up on the table, aligned it perpendicular to the microphone like a tiny headstone, and concluded, "Madam, when you mock small towns, you mock the places that still produce the plumbers who fix your luxury faucets, the truckers who deliver your eco-friendly toilet paper, the linemen who restore power after storms so you can post storm selfies with captions about resilience. When you mock church budgets, you mock the last institutions in America where no one asks your pronouns before handing you a casserole, where the offering plate includes quarters from teenagers who skip the movies to give, where prayers are said for leaders who would never set foot inside because contempt is easier than contrition. You are free to keep your rooftop views, your Tesla, your Tulum retreats, your sweatshop merch, your Cayman carbon credits, your performative poverty, and your Instagram abuela. But you are not free to do so, though without being called to account by the very people whose small-town, church-budget lives you monetize for clout. May this committee record reflect that the gentle lady's words have been weighed in the balance and found wanting, and may the next election reflect that the voters of the Bronx are not content to be background actors in the movie of your ambition." He closed the folder for the final time, the burgundy leather settling like a coffin lid, nodded once to the chair, and resumed his seat as the clock struck the hour. Each tick a gavel, pronouncing sentence on a reputation that had just been dissected, displayed, and donated to the Smithsonian of Political Cautionary Tales. Exhibit A in the Museum of What Happens When Arrogance Meets Arithmetic, and the arithmetic has a southern drawl. But the silence that followed was not an ending. It was merely the pause between movements in a requiem that had not yet reached its final cadence. Because Johnson, gentleman though he may be, is also a Louisianan, raised on bayous where stories stretch like Spanish moss, and every dockside sermon needs at least 3 verses of revelation before the congregation can safely head home for gumbo. So he reopened the folder one last time, drew a breath so deep it seemed to inhale the very humidity of Shreveport summers, and began the coda that would turn 13 pages into an epic, a hearing transcript into a televised novella, a takedown into a tapestry woven from the individual threads of every hypocrisy he had yet to unfurl. "Madam, indulge me a brief excursus on the subject of lexical poverty," he began, voice now velvet rather than whisper, the courtroom cadence giving way to something closer to campfire incantation. "You have weaponized the word justice so frequently it has become a semantic husk, a syllabic piñata, beaten until candy-coated slogans spill across Twitter like cheap confetti. Let us therefore restore its heft." He projected a Merriam-Webster entry, enlarged to poster size. Justice, tanu, the maintenance or administration of what is just, especially by the impartial adjustment of conflicting claims. "Note the modifier impartial," he said, underlining it in red expo marker whose scent briefly transported older members back to chalk dust civics classes. Impartial does not mean partial to whichever constituency is live streaming. Impartial does not mean partial to the donor who Venmo'd during the commercial break. And impartial certainly does not mean partial to one's own investment portfolio, disguised as moral urgency. He clicked forward to a slide titled Justice Quantified, a spreadsheet whose rows ran for days. The number of times she tweeted the word 847, the number of times she voted against bipartisan appropriations that would have delivered measurable justice to her district, 23, the number of those lost votes that would have increased Pell Grant maximums, $1,400 per student, the number of summer youth jobs, foregone, 4,800, the number of lead-painted windows that could have been replaced, 1,900, the number of asthma-related ER visits that might have been averted, 3,300, each figure footnoted to CRS reports, OMB scorekeepers, and city health datasets whose PDFs collectively weighed more megabytes than the entire 1619 project. He lingered on the asthma row, noting that the zip code covering her district's southern tier has the highest pediatric asthma hospitalization rate in New York State, a statistic he juxtaposed with a photo of her lighting a sage smudge on an Instagram story captioned, "Cleansing bad energy from the Capitol." The particulate matter from that single stick of white sage equivalent, according to EPA particulate tables, to smoking 2.7 cigarettes, a dose she inhaled while children 3 miles away wheeze through nights she spends selecting filters for posts about environmental racism. Next, he unfurled, literally unfurled like a medieval banner, a scroll printed on continuous feed paper, the kind 1980s payroll departments used, spooling down the aisle and requiring 2 clerks to hold it taut. A timeline of every fashion label collaboration she has undertaken, each horizontal line annotated with the average hourly wage of the workers who stitched the garments. The Eat the Rich satin bomber, made in Ho Chi Minh City, Dur 87 hour. The Fight Like a Girl crochet halter, Gujarat, Dur 64 hour. The Green New Deal hemp bucket hat, Shandong, 1 to 12 hour but deducted to Dur 89 after factory fees. He paused the scroll at a 2022 Tax the Rich ball gown partnership with a Paris couture house. Retail price $18,500. Workers' combined wage $112.43. Profit margin 94.2%. Then observed that the word rich appears in her Twitter bio, but the word worker does not. a lexical absence that speaks louder than any slogan silk-screened across a chest. He clicked again. A map of the world overlaid with red dots representing every factory that has produced her merchandise, the diameter of each dot proportional to OSHA violations recorded at that site. Vietnam, 47 violations, including a 2019 ammonia leak that sent 43 seamstresses to local clinics. Bangladesh, 112 violations, including a fire exit welded shut 3 weeks after she tweeted, "Housing is a human right." Los Angeles, 0 violations, 0 orders, 0 units, a statistical blank that rendered the phrase, "Buy American," a ghost in her supply chain. He zoomed in on one facility in Phnom Penh where teenage girls work 12-hour shifts sewing abolish student debt tote bags sold for $32 on her website, each girl earning $102 per month, a sum lower than the monthly interest that accrues on the average American student loan. An irony so dense it could bend light. Now he pivoted, slow, deliberate, to the subject of debt. The very word she weaponizes like a cudgel against banks, against billionaires, against anyone whose net worth exceeds the median. He projected her own financial disclosure, $19,000 in federal student loans, since paid off with book advance, wealth, $100 month car lease, $3,400 month apartment, $2,800 month wardrobe allowance, categorized as media preparation, all of which sum to a debt-to-income ratio of 31%, a figure lower than the 36% threshold most banks consider safe, meaning the most famous socialist in Congress is actually a better credit risk than the average American she claims to champion. He juxtaposed this with the average debt-to-income ratio in her district, 127%, driven by payday loans, ambulance bills, and credit card balances racked up buying groceries at bodegas whose prices rose 11% after the supply chain disruptions she voted to exacerbate by opposing port expansion funding. "Madam," he intoned, "you are not the voice of the indebted. You are the vacation home owner of indebtedness, the Airbnb host who monetizes the view of poverty without ever booking a night inside it." He advanced to a bar graph, the number of times she has appeared on cable news, 412 segments in 36 months, versus the number of town hall meetings held in her district, 7, 2 of which were virtual, one disrupted by technical difficulties she blamed on corporate broadband monopolies, while live streaming from a WeWork whose Wi-Fi is owned by those same monopolies. He overlaid a line showing the Nielsen ratings of her most watched segment, 3.2 million viewers, and the attendance at her most sparsely attended town hall, 47 constituents, 12 of whom were staffers, 5 were journalists, 3 mistook the room for the DMV. The ratio of screens to constituents, he observed, is 68,000 pounds. A representation gap wider than the gerrymandered district she claims was drawn by racist cartographers, a gap across which she shouts slogans like a digital Marie Antoinette, offering cake via Instagram stories. Now he reached into the folder's secret pocket, the one sewn into the spine like a smuggler's pouch, and withdrew a single Polaroid. Yes, an actual chemical photograph, shaking it gently as it developed before the committee's eyes, showing a pothole on 138th Street, so deep a child's bicycle tire is wedged vertically inside like a monument to civic neglect. On the back, in Sharpie, is the date, 6 days after she voted against a transportation bill because it included highway expansion that encourages car culture. He read aloud the 311 complaint accompanying the photo. "My wheelchair got stuck and I missed my chemo appointment." The caller's name, address, and Medicare number are redacted, but the metadata shows the ticket was closed without repair because the Department of Transportation's budget was trimmed by the precise amendment she co-sponsored to divert funds toward a Green Jobs Fellowship, whose first cohort included her chief of staff's roommate, a fellowship that produced a 37-page report recommending, wait for it, fewer pothole repairs because imperfect roads slow traffic and reduce emissions. Johnson let the Polaroid sit on the easel like evidence at a homicide trial, the child's bike tire a crucifix to abstract policy. He proceeded relentlessly to energy, the sector where her slogans achieve escape velocity from reality. He displayed her 2019 call to replace every furnace in America with heat pumps, then produced a quote from a heat pump installer in Queens. Average cost per unit, $18,000, not including electrical panel upgrades required in pre-war buildings like those dominating her district. Total estimated expense for her zip code alone, $1.4 billion, a sum that exceeds the entire annual budget of the NYKA Capital Works division. He overlaid a heat map of asthma clusters, showing that the highest rates coincide with buildings where tenants already use window unit ACs, whose energy draw spikes summer Con Ed bills to $400 a month. Bills those families cannot pay without the utility shutoff moratoria she votes against because they prop up fossil fuel utilities. The circularity, he observed, is so perfect it could be patented. Oppose fracking. Oppose pipelines. Oppose nuclear. Oppose utility bailouts. Oppose shutoff moratoria. Then wonder why constituents burn candles in January and develop respiratory disease from kerosene heaters bought with GoFundMe donations she retweets as evidence of community resilience. Now he slowed, almost to a halt, because the next exhibit required the delicacy of a bomb tech. He projected a redacted email chain between her campaign treasurer and a boutique PR firm discussing the rollout of her Tax the Rich dress at the Met Gala. The subject line, Optics Calibration. The internal poll. 73% of likely voters support taxing the rich, but only 41% support taxing themselves. The proposed solution: position the dress as aspirational class warfare rather than literal policy. The follow-up: ensure heels high enough to avoid association with working-class footwear. The invoice: $28,000 for narrative architecture, paid from a campaign account whose largest donor is a billionaire hedge fund manager who shorted renewable stocks the day after the gala. Because, as he told investors in a leaked audio clip, if she's the face of the green transition, buy oil. Her constituents can't afford Tesla subsidies, and they still need to drive to work. Johnson let the clip play twice, the billionaire's laughter echoing off marble like a hyena in Versailles. He clicked forward to a slide titled The Algebra of AOC, a literal algebraic equation scrawled across the board. Brand value plus merch margin. District poverty rate x policy efficacy equals on personal net worth, years in office. Solving for x, he arrived at $1.04 million per year, a figure that exceeds the lifetime earnings of the average Bronx household by a factor of 19.3. He noted that the variable policy efficacy is set to 0 because not a single bill she has authored has passed committee, meaning the entire product is brand equity extracted from the raw material of human struggle, a distillery of grievance into garment sales, a process as old as indulgences and twice as profitable now that Shopify handles tithing. Now he turned, page turning audible like a judge signing a death warrant, to foreign policy, the arena where her tweets meet geopolitical reality and reality blinks first. He displayed her 2021 tweet calling for an end to the U.S. embargo of Cuba, a post sent from her iPhone connected to Cuba's state-run Etexa network, whose bandwidth is throttled by the very regime she absolves. a network built with Chinese Huawei equipment she voted to ban in the United States. A contradiction she resolved by captioning, "Complexity is colonial rhetoric." He entered into evidence a receipt obtained via a Canadian tourist, showing she purchased a $180 handmade cigar in Havana, a sum equal to the monthly salary of the roller who crafted it, a roller who must surrender 90% of that revenue to the government, whose embargo she blames for his poverty. The cigar band, he observed, bore the face of Che Guevara, a man who executed dissidents without trial, a fact she dismissed in a follow-up tweet as contextual nuance lost on reactionaries, the same reactionaries whose parents fled to Florida with only the shirts on their backs, shirts now stitched in Nicaragua and sold on her website for $59. He advanced, inevitably, to the topic of taxation itself, the holy sacrament of her brand. He projected her 2020 beyond proposal for a 70% top marginal rate, then displayed an IRS transcript showing that in the year she proposed it, she herself paid an effective federal rate of 21%, lower than the 22% bracket of a single school bus driver in her district, whose W-2 shows $54,000 and zero itemized deductions because rent consumes 48% of gross pay. The difference, he explained, is the pass-through LLC that channels her book and merch income as business profit, taxable at the 20% qualified business rate she voted to extend because, as her staff emailed, small creators need incentives. The bus driver, he noted, does not have a creator LLC. He has a mortgage-sized rent payment and a daughter who needs braces. Braces whose cost could have been covered by the $1,400 stimulus check she opposed because it didn't transform the economy, a transformation she prefers to undertake via merch drops rather than Medicaid expansion. Now he reached the final pocket, the one hidden behind the folder's reinforced spine, and withdrew a single sheet of 24-pound cotton stock, the kind used for wedding invitations on which he had printed, in raised thermographic ink, the names of every constituent who emailed her office in 2022 requesting help with a federal agency. 14,372 messages, of which 3,109 received an auto-reply, 847 were forwarded to interns, 212 received substantive responses, and 11 received personal replies. He laid the sheet on the dais like a Torah scroll and invited members to run their fingers across the names to feel the braille of neglect. He read a sampling aloud. Maria, eviction; Luis, VA benefits; Tanisha, SSN delay; Abdul, refugee travel document; Gloria, IRS lien; Kareem, small business disaster loan, each name a syllable in a requiem for representation. He observed that the time she spent filming a single TikTok, 47 minutes per metadata, exceeds the average casework time devoted to each constituent email, 38 seconds, a ratio that converts democracy into content, constituents into extras, citizenship into a green screen backdrop for a dance trend choreographed to a song whose royalty stream funnels back to a record label whose largest shareholder is, wait for it, the same hedge fund billionaire who shorted solar after the Met Gala. The circle so tight it could be a wedding ring if only the bride were not already married to the brand. He stepped back, physically, 2 paces, so the camera could capture the full tableau. The scroll, the cigar, the Polaroid, the spreadsheet, the wedding stock name sheet, all of it arrayed like artifacts in a future museum titled The Age of Performative Altruism. Then, voice dropping to a bass note that seemed to emanate from the building's foundations rather than his diaphragm, he concluded, "Madam, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward accountability. You have bent it toward merch. You have bent it toward metrics. You have bent it toward the fleeting dopamine of a notification buzz. And in so doing, you have snapped it like a sugarcane stalk, leaving your constituents to lick the splinters while you sell them the syrup. May this committee note that no amount of sage smoke can cleanse the ledger of exploitation, no filter can beautify the face of neglect, and no hashtag can trend away the truth that you are the richest product your district has ever produced, yet the poorest representation it has ever endured. He closed the folder, this time for good, pressed his palms together as if in prayer, nodded once to the chair, and sat. The silence that followed was no longer awkward. It was geological, a sedimentary layer upon which future campaigns would fossilize, a silence so dense it bent the light and swallowed the ticking clock, a silence that would echo through every precinct house, every bodega, every rent-stabilized walk-up from the Grand Concourse to the Harlem River, a silence that said, "The age of influencer politics just met its reckoning." And the reckoning is 13 pages long, single-spaced, footnoted, notarized, and bound in burgundy. But even that silence proved porous, because Johnson, Louisianan to the marrow, understood that no requiem is complete until the last echo dies against the cypress knees, so he reopened the folder a final time, extracting not paper, but a small black plastic rectangle, a portable projector no larger than a deck of cards. He aimed it at the ceiling, the highest surface in the chamber, and suddenly the room became a planetarium of indictment. Constellations of data points swirled overhead, every Venmo transaction rendered as a star, brighter stars for larger sums. The Amazon HQ2 jobs lost transformed into a meteor shower that streaked from the chandelier to the gallery rail. The 14 through 372 constituent emails became a galaxy whose spiral arms spelled, in negative space, the word abandoned. Members tilted their heads like children at a science museum, necks cricking, mouths ajar, as the gentle lady's own Instagram grid, 3,000 or he sat in photos, rotated slowly above them, each image stitched together into a celestial sphere, a firmus of filtered narcissism upon which her political planet rotated. At the pole sat the Met Gala dress, a supermassive black hole pulling every other image into its event horizon. The caption, "Tax the Rich," now curved by the projector's lens into an Einstein ring, gravitational light bending made literal. He spoke while the cosmos wheeled. "Madam, you once tweeted that budgets are moral documents. Look up. Your morality is now a constellation. See how the stars form the shape of a handbag priced at 500% markup. See how the meteor shower of lost Amazon salaries intersects the nebula of overseas labor, the physics of their collision calculated to the exact dollar value of rent your constituents can no longer afford. Astronomers call this a syzygy, 3 celestial bodies aligning. Your rhetoric, your revenue, and their reality have achieved perfect alignment, and the tidal force is lifting families out of their apartments and into the shelter system." The projection slowly zoomed until a single star filled the ceiling. A pixelated close-up of the cracked ceiling in her grandmother's house, the fissure now large enough to swallow the room. A stellar rift into which every previous excuse vanished like light falling beyond the Schwarzschild radius. Then, as the image dimmed to a dull red glow, cosmic background radiation of unresolved shame, he produced a cassette tape, an actual Maxell 232S 90-minute chrome cassette, the kind once used to mix love songs in 1987, and slotted it into a vintage Walkman he had seemingly conjured from thin air. He pressed play, and the chamber filled with the sound of a dial-up modem, the screech and clang of 56K negotiating a connection. A noise that anyone under 30 has never heard, and anyone over 30 still hears in nightmares. Over that screech, a voice emerged, hers, reading a 2018 campaign email. "We refuse corporate PAC money. We are people-funded." The modem static grew louder, layered beneath another voice, also hers, from a 2022 private fundraiser audio leaked to the Daily Caller. "Of course we take billionaire checks if they align with our values. That's just coalition politics." The two tracks phased in and out, an auditory moire pattern, until the screech resolved into a single tone, the frequency mathematically calibrated to the exact hertz of a human scream recorded in anechoic chamber conditions. Johnson let the tone linger for exactly 4.7 seconds, shorter than a heartbeat, longer than a conscience, then clicked, "Stop." The silence that returned was not empty. It was the silence of a hard drive after you drag a folder into the trash and the progress bar vanishes. Technically, nothing. Emotionally, everything. He next produced a mason jar, sealed with a ribbon in the exact shade of campaign teal she uses for email headers, and held it aloft. Inside, 331 grams of shredded paper. The precise weight of every unpaid intern's resume, her office discarded during the last hiring cycle. Resumes that arrived on 24 Leo cotton stock because career counselors told applicants, "Congress expects quality." He had pulped them, dried them, and mixed them with glitter. Biodegradable, naturally. So the jar sparkled like a snow globe of broken dreams. "Each flake," he said, "is a line item of student debt, $89,000. For the Columbia journalism major who wanted to cover climate policy, $67,000 for the CUNY political science grad who speaks fluent Spanish and could have translated constituent services, $134,000 for the Howard Law School applicant who hoped to draft legislation but will now draft lattes at Starbucks because she couldn't afford to work for free. He inverted the jar and the glitter settled slowly, a blizzard in miniature, until the final flake landed atop a single unshredded corner still legible. A bulleted list that reads, "Skills, Canvassing, Policy Research, Reliable Vehicle." He observed that the vehicle in question was repossessed 6 months later, the towing fee, $475, exceeding the monthly stipend she offered the intern, $400, whose job, per the offer letter, required some evenings and weekends, mileage not reimbursed. Now he wheeled in, literally on a dolly, a section of actual sidewalk torn from 138th Street, a 4x4 slab of cracked concrete complete with fossilized gum and a boot print still visible in the cement. He had obtained it via a DIOT work order he sponsored under the guise of infrastructure demonstration, and the slab now rested on a furniture dolly like a relic from a saint who never existed. "This," he declared, "is the pavement your constituents walk to reach the bodega, where milk costs $6.49 because the supply chain disruptions you voted to exacerbate have raised freight rates 38%. He invited members to touch the slab, to feel the fissures where rainwater pools and freezes and expands, popping aggregate like vertebrae under pressure. He produced a small level, brass, artisanal, made by a 6th-generation shaker craftsman, and placed it atop the slab. The bubble drifted immediately left, a 7-degree tilt, enough to pool rainwater toward the curb where elderly residents step off buses and risk hip fractures. 7 degrees, he repeated, is the same tilt as the Gini coefficient of your district has shifted during your tenure. A statistical concavity that funnels money uphill and pain downhill. A physics so reliable it might as well be Newtonian. He then reached into his breast pocket, inside the jacket, deeper than seemed possible, and withdrew a children's picture book. A is for Activist, board book edition, pages chewed at the corners by actual toddlers. He opened to page 8. D is for degrowth. He read aloud. Degrowth means shrinking the economy so the planet can breathe. He observed that the book is printed on virgin paper sourced from old-growth boreal forests in Finland, shipped via diesel freighter to Los Angeles, then trucked across the continent to Brooklyn warehouses, where it retails for $16.99, a price that could buy 17 pounds of dried beans at the bodega. Enough calories to feed a family for a week. He entered into the record a photo of the book displayed at a Park Slope baby shower, whose gift table also includes a $950 ergonomic stroller made from recycled ocean plastic, the recycling process powered by Indonesian coal plants, whose emissions drift across the Pacific and deposit as acid rain on the very forests that produce the paper. A closed loop of moral preening whose carbon footprint could be seen from orbit, if only satellites measured irony. He closed the book and handed it to the clerk, requesting it be catalogued under Juvenile Fiction, Economics. Next, he dimmed the lights to a level achievable only by extinguishing half the chamber's bulbs, technically against safety code but permitted by unanimous consent, and projected a thermal image of the Capitol Dome taken at 3:00 a.m. during a budget vote-a-rama, the reds and oranges showing heat leakage through 19th century cast iron. He overlaid a live feed of the steam plant across the street, the plant that burns natural gas to heat the very building in which she proposes banning natural gas. The irony visible as literal hot air rising into the DC night. He calculated the BTU loss. Enough to heat 412 row houses in Anacostia, the neighborhood where 37% of residents struggle to pay winter utility bills. He observed that the steam plant pays a carbon tax she voted to impose, then receives a rebate she also voted to impose, a circular subsidy that totals $1.2 million per year, precisely the amount her campaign raised in the quarter she tweeted, "End fossil fuel subsidies now." The circle so perfect it could be a wedding ring if only the bride were not already married to contradiction. Now he produced a vinyl record, 180-gram audiophile pressing. The album art, a stylized portrait of her face rendered in socialist realist crimson. Side A, speeches. Side B, silences. He dropped the needle on track 3, her 2019 floor speech declaring, "No one should work 2 jobs to survive." The audio plays, but beneath it, mixed into the sub-bass, is the sound of a Bronx diner at 5:30 a.m. Clanking plates, a short-order cook calling "order up," a waitress humming along to a reggaeton radio while refilling coffee for truckers en route to Hunts Point Market. The waitress, he informs the chamber, is named Felicia, mother of 3, effective tax rate 14%, who works a double shift before heading to a night class she pays for with a Pell Grant. The gentle lady voted to cut because it subsidizes for-profit colleges, the same colleges that granted the congresswoman her own economics degree, a circularity so tight it could be a noose, if only the rope were not already made of student loan promissory notes. The track ends with the waitress's tip bell ringing, the chime frequency mathematically identical to the notification sound on the gentle lady's phone when a new merch sale clears. A unity of opposites audible to any ear willing to listen. Finally, though the chamber now sensed that "finally" is a word Johnson treats as hypothetical, he reached into the folder's absolute inner sanctum, a pocket so deep it might have been lined with space-time itself, and produced a single seed, a heirloom mortgage lifter tomato seed, patented 1940s, the name originating from its ability to produce fruit so large a farmer could lift the mortgage off one season's sale. He held the seed between thumb and forefinger, backlit by the projector, so the tiny speck became a solar eclipse. "Madam," he whispered, "this seed weighs 0.5 milligram, costs $0, 3 cheese. and can feed a family for a summer. Your smallest campaign donation button asks for $5, enough to buy 167 seeds or one branded tote bag. The tote bag will fray by 2026. The seeds will feed grandchildren. You have chosen the tote. May this committee note that when the arc of history bends toward justice, it does so one seed at a time, and no amount of influencer market share can photosynthesize a single calorie. He placed the seed on top of the mason jar of glitter-strewn resumes, a universe in miniature where potential and pulverization coexist, a still life titled Choices. Then he closed the folder, truly, irrevocably, pressed his palms together as if concluding a prayer, and sat. The clock read 00 because someone had unplugged it. Time had surrendered. The silence that remained was not the absence of sound, but the presence of verdict. A hush so total it felt like the entire republic inhaling, holding its breath, waiting for the next notification buzz that would never again sound the same.